Anouk studied political economics, and over the last decade, she developed her research skills as an economic analyst and investigative journalist, worked as a software developer, and founded several communities in the tech space. She currently researches and develops data governance models as a Mozilla Fellow embedded with AlgorithmWatch. So Anouk, how does data governance impact the work of iOS developers?
Right. So I used to be a mobile developer, specifically an iOS developer, and that's not at all how I ended up doing this work. However, I think there's two ways. So first of all, of course, it impacts the work of an iOS developer because how we handle our data and how we decide who gets to control the data we collect will ultimately impact how we build apps.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I also think the iOS developers themselves have a unique opportunity to talk with their employers and their clients about how data is collected. Because, yeah, you know how it's done. You know what libraries you're using. You know what data points you're collecting. And so asking the questions about who gets to decide how this data is used and where is it going to go can actually make a huge impact on how we end up governing that data.
Hmm. So how did you go from being an economic analyst and investigative journalist and all these, forgive me for saying so, but like non-techie kind of things to being an
Right.
iOS developer?
Um, it wasn't quite like that. So I was working as economic analyst of sorts. And in that period, I got a bit bored and I was kind of looking for a new hobby. And people were talking about everyone needing to be able to build their own website. So I started doing some really basic CSS, HTML. And then I realized that there were other things out there. Like I really knew nothing about computers. And so I started playing around with Python for a bit and just enjoyed it so much. And I have some obsessive tendencies. So I kind of just obsessively went into programming, decided that that's what I wanted to do with my life.
Mhm.
Turned out that part of my life ended up lasting like 3-4 years, but for 3-4 years I dedicated myself to yeah, doing all sorts of things in the software development world, and landed on mobile development, particularly because it was quite a new field at the time.
Mhm.
And I felt like at least I'd be learning with everyone else rather than going into a field that was so well developed that I also had to learn and kind of, yeah, learn the culture as well as the coding.
Sure, sure, that makes sense. So what are we going to be hearing about at UIKonf from you?
Oh, I'm going to be talking about data governance and specifically about data trusts, which are
Okay.
a specific data governance model. And I think maybe more important than me explaining right now what a data trust is explaining why I think they're needed. And that's also, if there's anything about my talk that ends up sticking in people's heads, I hope it's this. It's the notion that our privacy is not just about individuals, and it's kind of what we are sort of relearning during this pandemic. Is like just relying on individuals to make decisions for themselves doesn't always add up to the best collective decisions.
Mhm.
Like we cannot just rely on people to figure out whether they want to go outside or stay in a lockdown. Our individual decisions can actually end up impacting others on collective massive scales. And so, in a way, with privacy, it's the same. Me sharing data about myself could end up hurting someone else, even if that
Mhm.
data isn't even about that person. But also, if you decide you never want to share any data about yourself, which is obviously virtually impossible, but let's say you achieve that goal about 80% of the time, even in that case, the fact that everyone around you is sharing data about themselves means we can still make a lot of inferences about you.
Right.
And that means that if we really want to get better at deciding how this data is collected and how it's accessed and used and by who and for what purpose, we can't just leave it to you to figure out Facebook's privacy settings. We need
Mhm.
to start doing that on a more collective scale, which also means negotiating between all the many interests and all the many needs that people have. And it's also not all negative. It's also like finding out the needs in a more positive way. Like we can use data for many good things. Um, both on an individual level and a collective level.
Hmm.
And so there are lots of models for that. There are lots of models for doing sort of collective data governance, and data trusts are one of those models. And the reason I focus on them for this talk is because that's what I've been doing for the last year. And they come with some fun legal instruments built in, which I will discuss as well.
Well, fun and legal don't usually go hand in hand.
I know.
But
I know.
trust you on this one.
It's very true. It's weird because I have all these weird backgrounds, and legal wasn't one of them. And I've been reading a lot of legal texts in the last year. I always thought it would be boring, but it's actually really fun and not dissimilar to the way a programmer's mind works.
Sure.
So
yeah, I've noticed that lawyers and programmers often think the same way. You know,
think the same way, don't talk the same language. It's very interesting.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Although, you know, it's one of those things you have to fully specify what you want.
Right.
That's in a totally different language.
Yeah.
Lawyers don't speak English. They, you know. And
neither do programmers, let's be honest.
That's true too. Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to your talk, and it's been great chatting with you. I hope you have a great, I guess it's evening where you are.
It is evening, yes.
And I hope I see you online at the conference, and I'm sure we'll see each other in person one of these days.
I mean, one can only hope. Thank you so much. I hope everyone comes to hear me talk, but most importantly, comes to ask me a bunch of interesting questions, because I always like to get questions. Thank you.